Welcome, everyone. Welcome to today's People Development webinar. We want to help you cultivate an enriching workplace where people thrive. We are going to try to share today some ideas for how you can apply natural law principles in the workplace to achieve more enduring results without the many unintended consequences that comes from traditional human resources, human capital management philosophies. Today's presentation, we're considering people development process. We're thinking about the people development process. Wes, can you share or explain why we chose the topic Pruning the Vines, Capabilities Prune to Encourage Growth?
Sure, absolutely. Well, a common practice in horticulture is pruning, and one of the main purposes of pruning is to focus the plant's efforts on the most productive branches. The same principles apply to people development. But the key, which we'll talk about in greater detail today, is to focus on facilitating growth and not, quote, managing that plant or employee in this case.
So let's introduce ourselves. Christi, why don't you start?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. My first opportunity to interview Steve this afternoon. Steve is one of 12 kids and has over 3 decades of experience. That's a lot of kids, Steve. And he would be probably rather be golfing. And he is also our actuary and our behavioral design expert.
Well, I don't have 12 kids. It was great growing up in a family of 12. Never a dull moment, that's for sure. I'll introduce Wes. Wes is our humaculturist. He has more than 55 years of experience in gardening and fishing and is easily distracted by ocean air or a water view of pretty much any sort.
Absolutely. Well, Christi is, she's a world traveler and a wine connoisseur, and she tells me that she is a recovering registered nurse. She's got more than 30 years of experience in people and leadership development and related human resources work.
So excited to be here.
Wes, which aspects of humaculture apply in today's discussion?
Well, see, first of all, as many already know perhaps, but and in reality, each dimension in the 7 dimensions of humaculture really impact all the others. That's the idea behind humaculture. Humaculture gives us a way to make decisions about an organization or business in a more holistic and effective way. We've covered this in more detail in previous webinars, so all of that's available on our website. But for today, with this topic, pruning the vines, our goal is really to help people become their best and to best meet the organization's needs. So the dimensions that are most directly involved are the organization itself, the intangible assets, people, and rewards. And to illustrate how connected these dimensions are, rewards are the mechanisms, processes, or policies that distribute the real assets. For example, in this case, the pay and benefits to employees. Rewards can be very helpful in encouraging the right growth, especially once we've pruned away potential distractions. And we'll try to touch on these concepts more in detail as we talk today.
So, Wes, to me, the idea of pruning sounds a little rough around the edges, right? It sounds a little harsh, like we're cutting someone or cutting off a piece of them or cutting them out of an organization. How does pruning actually fit into the growth facilitation mindset?
Well, good question, Christi. I think a lot of people think of pruning as an exercise to cut away overgrowth or maybe a process to force a plant into a desired shape. You might think about the tree services you see as you drive down the road, clearing away the right-of-ways, just whacking away at those plants. So for most people, perhaps pruning, or for many people, pruning is more of an activity that a gardener or a landscaper does to the plant, and is primarily for the convenience and benefit of the gardener or landscaper. But as a longtime gardener and horticulturist, I think of pruning very differently, more as an exercise that is first and foremost to benefit the plant. And the plant will benefit me because I've helped it to focus its energies on where it really should need to thrive. And that shift in thinking, that epiphany of growth facilitation is where I hope that our chat today will lead us. As we mentioned earlier, we'll have much better results for the employees and the organization if we have a growth facilitation mindset rather than focusing on, quote, management. There are several ideas prevalent in traditional people development and HR today that kind of fall more into that management mindset. And considering those may help us understand better, just by way of contrast, what we mean by pruning from a growth mindset. So let's start with the concept of competencies. And Christi, what do you think of competencies and how that concept is used primarily today in most people development in organizations?
Yeah, thank you. So I think every one of us understands that competencies are, to help us make sure we're able to do a job, right?
Mhm.
But in my experience and expertise, competencies tend to be just a check the box exercise to
Mhm.
make sure that we've addressed all of the regulatory requirements in our varying industries, right? So we do have to make sure that those employees are safe and that they are keeping each other safe from as coworkers. But there's definitely a place for competencies in the workplace. The point I want to start for us to think about here is, over the years, competencies have just become a very passive process to simply validate if an employee can do their entire job. Competency requirements can become this long list of skills and knowledge, judgment, attributes, right, for the job itself, as opposed to just the regulatory pieces. And they may not provide the focus that's really necessary to drive the success of that individual or for the organization as a whole. So competencies can lead to what I like to call the warm body syndrome. And people can check that competency box. I can do the job, but can I provide the real capabilities that an organization needs to advance either that specific employee or the desire of the organization to grow? And as we're going to discuss throughout this session, the focus needs to shift towards building capabilities for those employees and for the organizations. So as we think about strengths and weaknesses within the capabilities realm, Wes, is it better to fix a weakness or is it better to focus on strengths?
Well, Christi, I think a really common trap for many well-intentioned and even very high-performing, skilled employee and ambitious employees and leaders is to try to do everything, and often that results in not really excelling at much of anything. And traditional performance management and people development often focuses on finding and fixing weaknesses, I think, or undesirable behaviors, but that's often a negative experience for the employees, and sometimes they become frustrated and even less engaged. So focusing on weaknesses can sometimes consume a lot of time that keeps you from really building personal strengths and real value for the organization.
Which I completely agree with. However, there are at times certain weaknesses that can be devastating to an organization, right? Whether it's personally or for the organization overall. So, it's important to make sure that we're addressing weaknesses when they are holding back either the individual or the company, and particularly within the performance structures.
So I also just want to add on this is if we aren't doing this right, there could be a very deleterious impact on the people themselves, their health, their well-being. So when we develop people's strengths, it helps them become more confident, productive, and self-aware. And according to a Gallup survey that I recently saw, it leads to higher employee engagement, increased performance, lower attrition, improved team collaboration, higher productivity, and higher profitability. And it was significant. It was not just it was like 20% plus in each of those categories.
Which I think is a really important point. And there's another super hotly debated topic among HR leaders and leaders in every industry, which is whether or not a great employee will make a great manager or a great leader. And so we are going to kick this off with a poll, and I'll kick it over to Steve to talk about what you all in the audience think about that.
All right, I'm going to launch a poll here. Please respond with your likelihood. Will a great employee make a great manager or leader? And make sure you hit submit once you've responded.
I'm interested to see what the folks on our call today will be thinking here.
Absolutely.
Getting there. All right, we're over 90% responding, so I'm going to go ahead and close it. 95. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it to keep things moving. Share those results.
Interesting, interesting. So we've got a bit of a neutral mix here, right?
Yeah.
I think you really can see that some people think it's unlikely or very likely, but the predominance of you are in this maybe, maybe not category, right? You're right, because that's my answer. My standard answer is it depends, right? It depends on whether we're actually observing these employees in the environment, right? And to determine whether or not those employees who are really great technically at their job are exhibiting any kind of leadership from an informal perspective. And in our growth mindset, as managers and leaders, we're walking that garden, right? So we are looking to better understand what exactly our employees have for those talents and techniques, observing them on a frequent basis in a variety of settings. And that's the way to best identify what that coaching and development can provide. And just because an employee is technically competent does not necessarily mean they would make a good manager if we just promoted them, right? Quick pat on the back. Hey, here's a little extra cash. Off you go. No growth or development opportunity there. But walking the garden shows that manager or that leader, we can develop this person. And here's what they are going to need to develop, right? And we should also be seeking great employees who have those right capabilities already and continuing to coach and develop them into outstanding managers. And I'm sure that many of you have watched the sitcom The Office, right? So Steve Carell's character, Michael Scott, is he the perfect example of sort of a mediocre leader or manager, right? Did he walk the garden? Well, he walked the garden, but I'm not sure he was assessing his employees for the level of promotion. So with focused development and coaching, the right employees can shift into managing and leadership.
Okay, that's very good information, Christi, and well said. And I think that the point that we want to really make here, and the kind of the climax of our discussion today would be mainly that many, if not most organizations, spend a great deal of time and energy, quote, managing employees and performance. There's a lot of focus on checklists and competencies and getting the annual performance appraisal done and the paperwork completed and filed, and that kind of, as Christi's been saying, the check the box sort of work. And so our goal here with this webinar series is to really help change our thinking to get to a mindset of growth facilitation.
The question is, how do we do that? So let's talk about that.
Well, it's a good question. So as a gardener, and then, again, thinking about this from our humaculture perspective, if I know what I want to grow, and perhaps that's, a vegetable garden, and I'm going to sell some vegetables. I know the climate that I live in. I know what people near me are likely to purchase, what kinds of things they're looking for. If I know those things, I can plan the best type of soil structure. I can amend the soil in the way that I need to. I can determine how much space I need for these different things, choose the best varieties, get them in the right places, and all those sorts of things. And all of that will contribute to a successful agribusiness. Or I could think about this another way, and that's to think about going on a trip or a journey somewhere. And if I know exactly where I'm going, I have a specific address in mind, for instance, I'm more likely to actually get there and arrive on time. So the more specific I can be, the better chance I'll have of getting there, or maybe more importantly, help any others get there as well.
Well, I just want to build on that. So many organizations have a vision and a mission statement. They're lofty, they sound inspiring on the surface, but they tend to be too vague to really help employees understand what the organization is specifically trying to accomplish. The specifics about the business are important to dictate, well, how is it going to operate? What must flow to get you to that clear destination? You really need a clear understanding of what the organization is about, why it exists, so that you can make sure it's going to operate, get you there, and that you have the right capabilities. Perhaps the operational aspect should be a topic for one of our future webinar series.
I think we could certainly think about that, Steve. And, you know, I think ultimately, from the human resources perspective, without a really clear vision, without a really clear mission and a direction for the organization, it makes it really hard for us on the HR side to help employees and perform at that highest level if there's confusion about either of those things, that vision or that mission. But those with human resources responsibilities may not have that necessary influence to directly address the vision and the mission at the organizational level. And I would encourage us from the human resources perspective to make sure that we are communicating upward to our leaders within an organization about exactly
Absolutely.
that.
So Wes, how would you say that you can translate that into required capabilities?
Okay, well, again, thinking about this from the growing perspective or the going perspective, if I'm going on a trip or growing something, either one of those, obviously I can determine what I need to do or where I'm going, plan out the path, etc. So from the Humaculture perspective, if I know specifically what I'm doing, then I can determine specifically what I need and how I'm going to get there. Similarly, if I think about this from an organizational perspective, when I've determined what it is my organization is supposed to do, then I can determine the specific capabilities and those unique combinations of skills and processes and technologies, et cetera, the human abilities I'm going to need that will really allow my company, my organization to come to life and carry out its vision and mission. And then also, if I've got those right capabilities and skills in place, then I'll be able to innovate and respond to changing customer needs, for example.
Yeah, which I think is right on. So Wes, talk about some examples of how this might apply in practice for our participants.
Alex would take that. Whoops.
Got to go the right way, Steve.
What's that?
You got to go the right way.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, each organization and individual will need to determine the capabilities important to help achieve specific goals. Actually, we adapted this model, which was from a model developed by Smallwood and Ulrich, to think about the required capabilities more specifically for the individual and the organization. We did change it a fair amount, putting the organization first and calling out the functional and relational capabilities. Wes, can you walk through this model?
Yeah, sure. Well, as you point out, Steve, we've really developed this to allow us to kind of parse the various kinds of abilities that we're looking for into 4 quadrants. The first row is the functional capabilities we're looking for, and the second are relational capabilities. And then the first column would be those that we need as an organization on a high level, a whole. And then the second column would be those that we need from people. So when an organization decides it exists for a given purpose, then it's going to be able to determine what sorts of equipment and tools, technical knowledge, intellectual capital that it's going to need. What are the capabilities it needs functionally to carry out its vision and mission? But it's also going to need the relational abilities. It's got to market its brand. It's got to get the brand out there, build confidence in the brand, assure that the employees are understanding how to carry out their jobs, how to relate together, how well they do things. But then likewise, when an organization knows those functional capabilities that it needs, then it can begin to look for people with functional capabilities, skills and expertise, knowledge, et cetera, that we see in the third quadrant of this chart, so that it will be able to, as a whole, with the right mix of people and the right skill sets, et cetera, carry out its mission and vision again. But each of those people, in order to operate within their roles, will need certain interpersonal leadership and just others innate abilities and interests in order to function well in the organization as well. So once we know what an organization needs, what it's supposed to do, how do we assess which capabilities that it may already have if it's an existing organization, and how we can fill any gaps and identify those? Steve?
Great question. And you mentioned we need to develop the personal capability, the people capabilities to support that required organizational capability. In order to do this successfully, we need to consider the role of capabilities in every aspect of people systems and throughout the employment lifecycle. In each aspect of our people processes, we need to be clear about what is the objective and what are the role of capabilities in that people process. And then clarify how we can identify, understand, assess, and nurture capabilities throughout the organization to support the organizational mission and vision. Well, we don't necessarily need to go through all these. Christi, could you perhaps give us a couple of examples?
Sure, yeah, I'm going to take the top two here, people acquisition and learning management. So when we think about people acquisition right now, it's a challenge, right, for everyone, no matter where, no matter what industry. The great resignation is on the front page of every article, newspaper, and publication right now. To me, though, it's a misnomer because employees were resigning at a higher than normal rate before COVID happened, right? And we all know that. Now it just has a name, the Great Resignation. And now that it's at the forefront, these resignations are causing many organizations to compromise on that talent acquisition. It might not be new, but there's always been a large portion of the workforce also who shows up but is not engaged and fully productive. So now, many of you may have seen the new Wall Street Journal article from last week called Quiet Quitting. Also, not a new phenomenon. People come to work, but they're not really engaged. So an organization that really understands the capabilities required for success and hires those capabilities will actually be able to elevate the talent, engage that talent, more easily retain that talent. And this might mean moving around within the organization. So that brings up the learning management side, which actually many of us probably have learning management systems. To me, the system itself is yet another example of check the box. We go in, we do what we're supposed to do, we get out, check, we've done our annual training. That's training, right? That's orientation. That's not learning and development. We need to be looking at and developing true learning modules so that people can grow and develop within their current areas, or if they want to expand into others, they can do that and learn how to become a manager or a leader.
So then, practically speaking, how do you guide your efforts so that they're really focused on what the people in the organization need? How do we make sure that we're not just trying to force employees into roles where they may not thrive?
Well, building on session one, it's important to focus on walking the garden, to get to know your employees, build trust, stimulate motivation, align interests, really take their needs and interests to heart, and really think about what's best for them. Clearly, the selection process is a critical first step. Then through these discussions, a manager can be in a better position to really understand the relational and functional capabilities of that employee, their attributes for their current role, their future role, how they're performing in those, how are their behaviors, and how well are they suited for their current and future roles. Then look at their performance and how is it matching up to their expectations for their current role, and what about how would they do in some future role. These then all need to support the overall vision, values, organizational goals of the organization. I mean, ultimately, this organization exists to provide some greater value to all the people in it and the greater community of customers, et cetera. We'll address these concepts in more detail in our next 3 webinars, so we hope you'll join us for that.
Okay, so at this point, let's take a couple of minutes to think about some things we call heuristics that might affect how good of a job we can do at facilitating growth. Steve, can you explain what a heuristic is and how it might apply here to pruning to facilitate growth?
Absolutely. Before I do, though, I just want to remind people that to post some questions if you have any questions that come up as we go along, so that we could respond to them at the end. I think we are doing all right to have some time for that. Steve, so we all use mental shortcuts to make decisions in life. These mental shortcuts are called heuristics. They usually serve us well and allow us to make decisions effectively, efficiently, quickly, without paralyzing us. They're trying to capture every data point to help us make that decision. However, we also need to understand that relying on these mental shortcuts could become problematic or cause us to go down the wrong path sometimes. So we need to understand what some of those heuristics are and how they might handcuff us or take us down that wrong path.
So heuristics are still a little bit confusing to me. It's a big word that I wasn't even really familiar with until recently. So Steve, share some specific examples of how heuristics would apply in this situation.
Absolutely. So the horns effect is one where you can, if you're focusing too heavily on weaknesses, the employee may perceive all feedback as criticism and not listen to proper instruction, leading to a breakdown of trust with that manager, with the cohesiveness of the team, and really inhibit the growth of that employee. The recency bias is one where you overemphasize what just happened. So when you have a once a year evaluation process, you're going to think more about just what happened and give heavier emphasis to that, and not think about what's truly important or what truly happened over the course of the year. Again, the importance of that walking the garden. The affect bias is one where we allow our emotions to carry us away at times, and we may get focused on things that aren't important because of what emotionally carries us away on something. The status quo bias is where causes people to take the easy way out. I'll just do the same thing for all of my employees, a uniform common development plan, or don't take the time to really recognize the common strengths or the individual's strengths, or only those weaknesses that inhibit growth. We focus on things that aren't important.
Okay, so we ought to consider how leaders and employees themselves can overcome these potentially negative effects.
So yeah, there are literally hundreds of different strategies to overcome biases. There are hundreds of heuristics that people use. There are certainly strategies to overcome all of these different biases. First, as we mentioned in our last session, make sure you're walking the garden regularly to build rapport, understand interests, and provide support they need. Second, as mentioned earlier, we need to keep focused on what is important with a greater emphasis on strengths, but also make sure we're addressing the weaknesses to make sure that, especially those that are detrimental, but not things that are superfluous. And finally, make sure you personalize a plan to each individual. Wes, can you summarize for us?
Sure. I know we've covered a lot in a very short time, and the idea is just to provide a very high-level summary and introduction to this way of thinking, but we want to shift our thinking from that management mindset to one of growth facilitation, both for the benefit of the employees, but also for the benefit of the organization. It'll be much better if we can do that. And one of the aspects that we're trying to stress in this particular webinar is the concept of pruning, and we want to think of pruning not as a radical act, but as something that really is focusing our attention on strengths and really those strengths that benefit the organization most. Steve, can you tell us about the remaining schedule, and then we'll wrap up here.
Absolutely. So this is our remaining schedule. The next session, we're going to expand on this and focus more detail on the broad people development. How do you apply these concepts at the broad people development perspective? Then we'll look at how do you decipher from all those who are going to be good managers and develop them for that position. And out of those, how do you identify and cultivate the leaders in the organization? So I think that does it. Now it looks like we are about out of time, but there's one question that we have, and I will read it, and I'm not entirely sure which slide this is referencing to. It says, you mentioned consensus earlier on a slide. What are you looking for in terms of consensus with employees? You recall what slide might have?
Yeah, so I think when we're creating clarity and consensus around a vision and mission statement, the idea there is to, you know, if you think about, maybe we'll use a football team example. When a football team is working together, whether it's the defense or the offense, if they all know the goal, they're going to get together better. And so what we're saying with that is that an effective vision and mission statement isn't just something that sounds really good and inspiring, you know, like well, our mission is our vision is to change the world. We want to know how we're going to do that. We want employees to know how we're going to do that. Recently working with a client, someone gave the example of it's like we're all trying to get, you know, from various parts of the country to Houston, but nobody gave us an address. So we all arrive in Houston. We don't quite know where we need to go, but we're in Houston. And so this consensus is a clear understanding among all the employees of exactly where they are heading as well, so that the organization can carry out its purpose.
And ultimately, what is their role in that mission and vision, right?
Absolutely.
What is my role in that, driving that mission and vision forward?
That's correct.
I think if people are part of that process, I think a lot of research supports this, that if they are part of that process and they take more ownership in it, and they're more likely to carry it out.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today. We are out of time. We
Absolutely.
hope you find this helpful. We would love to hear from you and learn more from you about what your specific challenges or circumstances are. Please remember to register for our next 3 sessions in this series and complete the survey. We would value your feedback, and we are adapting as we learn from you, so please share. We hope this was helpful for you. Thanks
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.